a Russian patrol frigate, sitting on picket duty at the southern approach to the Kerch Strait, radar spinning, rapid response boats on standby. Its crew had grown comfortable, dangerously comfortable. Same watch rotations, same predictable arcs, same blind spots. Ukraine's naval drone command had been mapping every single one of those arcs for weeks. Then came the swarm, 3 vectors, simultaneous approach, decoys flooding the radar picture. And by the time the first Sea Baby drone crossed inside minimum engagement range, it was already too late for the frigate's crew to do anything except sound the alarm. One blast of the general quarters klaxon. Then the first warhead hit the waterline. The Strait's guardian became the Strait's wreckage. I'm your host at ConflictEast, where we analyze the battles that change wars. Today, we're breaking down one of the most tactically sophisticated naval drone operations of the entire conflict, a coordinated swarm strike against a Russian warship that had spent weeks believing it was untouchable. This isn't just a story about a drone hitting a ship. It's a story about how Ukraine, a nation with no surface fleet left to speak of, systematically dismantled Russia's Black Sea strategy using technology that costs less than a used car, deployed with the precision of a military superpower. Stay with me. What unfolds in the next 24 minutes will show you why naval warfare will never be the same again. To understand why this strike happened and why it succeeded so completely, you need to understand what the Kerch Strait means to this war. The Kerch Strait is a choke point 17 kilometers across at its narrowest. It connects the Black Sea to the Sea of Azov. It's the primary logistical artery for Russian forces on the southern front, particularly for supplying occupied Crimea and the forces pushing through Zaporizhia and Kherson oblasts. Russia grasped the strategic importance of this waterway from the moment the full-scale invasion began. That's why they maintained a permanent naval presence at the Strait's southern approach. Patrol vessels, Coast Guard cutters, and periodically, dedicated warships capable of intercepting surface threats and providing radar coverage against aerial incursions. The vessel at the center of this operation was a Steregushchiy-class Corvette operating in a modified picket role, not one of Russia's showpiece frigates. Those had largely been driven from the open Black Sea by Ukrainian Neptune missile strikes years earlier. This was a hard-working patrol ship, compact, well-armed for its size, equipped with surface search radar, close-in weapon systems, and a crew of roughly 80 sailors who had been rotating through the same patrol sectors for the better part of a month. A crew that has been doing the same thing for a month develops habits. Habits become routines. Routines become vulnerabilities. Ukraine's Naval Intelligence Directorate, working in close coordination with GUR, the military intelligence arm known for its covert operations, had been cataloging those routines with extraordinary patience. Satellite imagery analysis confirmed the vessel's standard patrol arc, a roughly 40-kilometer loop that took approximately 4 hours to complete. The Corvette would sweep north toward the bridge approaches, hold station near the Strait's midsection, then arc back south toward open water. During the southernmost portion of that arc, the vessel's radar geometry created a predictable shadow zone to the southwest, a blind corridor roughly 6 kilometers wide, extending nearly 22 kilometers from the ship's position. 3 months of observation, 3 months of data collection, 3 months of building a picture detailed enough that Ukraine's drone operators knew, within minutes, exactly when the Corvette would be most vulnerable. Which weapon system was deadlier in this operation? The Sea Baby surface drone, the decoy platforms used to spoof the radar, or the intelligence network that mapped the target for 3 months? Comment below with A, B, or C. The answer shapes everything that follows. Now here's where the operation gets genuinely remarkable, and where you need to understand what the Sea Baby actually is, because Western media rarely gives it the technical depth it deserves. The Sea Baby, formally designated as a Ukrainian naval surface drone, though Ukraine keeps exact specifications deliberately vague for operational security reasons, is an asymmetric warfare weapon of elegant brutality. Surface dimensions roughly consistent with a large jet ski, low radar cross-section, electric propulsion that eliminates the acoustic signature of a combustion engine. Maximum range estimates from OSINT analysis suggest capacity for operations extending well beyond 100 kilometers from launch point. The warhead configuration matters most. Early Sea Baby variants carried approximately 70 to 80 kilograms of TNT equivalent explosive in a shaped charge configuration optimized for waterline detonation. Later models observed in operational footage appear significantly heavier in the bow section, suggesting warhead upgrades potentially reaching 120 kilograms or beyond. For context, a 100-kilogram shaped charge detonating against a ship's hull at the waterline does not simply punch a hole. It creates a pressure wave that propagates through the hull structure faster than the metal can flex to absorb it. Frames buckle. Welds crack along their entire length. Flooding begins not just at the impact point, but at every stress fracture the shock wave creates, sometimes meters away from where the drone actually struck. Against a Corvette-sized vessel with a displacement of approximately 500 tons, even a single well-placed hit creates flooding that the onboard damage control team will struggle to contain. 2 hits? The math becomes catastrophic. Stay with me. What happens in the next 18 minutes destroys an entire naval picket strategy. Ukraine didn't send one sea baby at this Corvette, and they didn't send them down the obvious approach vector. Planning for this operation began in the observation phase, when drone operators and intelligence analysts identified not just the Corvette's patrol arc, but the positioning of its rapid response escort boats, 2 smaller craft that would, in theory, intercept any surface threat before it reached the main vessel. Those escort boats were the first problem the operation had to solve. They represented an engagement envelope of roughly 3 kilometers around the Corvette, and they were fast. Small patrol craft can exceed 40 knots in calm conditions. A Sea Baby drone traveling at its estimated operational speed of approximately 35 to 40 knots would be overtaken by an alert escort boat before it could reach its target. So Ukraine designed around the problem. The operation launched from 3 separate points along the Ukrainian coastline and from positions further out in the northwestern Black Sea. Exact coordinates remain classified, but OSINT tracking of the operation's aftermath suggests a dispersed launch network designed to prevent any single interdiction from compromising the entire swarm. Total assets committed: 7 Sea Baby surface drones, plus 3 dedicated decoy platforms. The decoy platforms, smaller, faster, and expendable, were designed not to hit anything. They were designed to be seen. This is the elegance of the tactical design. The Steregushchiy surface search radar would detect multiple contacts simultaneously. The crew would track them. The escort boats would respond to the most immediate threats. And while the crew's attention and the escort boats' momentum carried them toward the decoys, the actual strike package was approaching from the southwest, threading the blind corridor that 3 months of intelligence work had identified. How many Russian naval assets did Ukraine destroy or damage in Sea Baby operations during this phase of the conflict? A 23 vessels, B-38 incidents, C-50 platforms? Answer coming at the end of this video. The night of the operation began with nothing unusual. The Corvette was completing its standard arc, the crew rotating through evening watch shifts. The weather was working against Ukraine in one respect: less cloud cover than ideal, meaning the moon, though only at quarter phase, provided more ambient light than drone operators preferred for concealed surface approach. Here's the first obstacle the operation faced, and it very nearly forced a postponement. Approximately 90 minutes before the planned launch window, one of the 3 primary launch platforms, a modified civilian vessel operating under cover in international waters, reported a mechanical fault with its drone release mechanism. The team aboard had a choice: abort the entire operation and wait for conditions to reset, or restructure on the fly, redistributing the strike package across the 2 remaining launch platforms while accepting slightly less optimal approach angles. The team chose to continue. 2 operators spent 47 minutes in darkness, physically reconfiguring the drone release sequence by hand, rerouting control cables to a backup system that had never been field tested under operational conditions. It worked. The launch sequence began with the decoy platforms. 3 fast, radar-reflective drones entered the water and raced toward the Corvette's position on a direct northern bearing, exactly the kind of surface threat that the crew's protocols would demand an immediate response to. The Corvette's radar operator had approximately 4 minutes between first detection of the decoys and the moment the escort boats were ordered to intercept. Those 4 minutes were the operational window. The moment the escort boats accelerated north toward the decoys, they were moving away from the southwest approach corridor. The actual strike package, 4 Sea Baby drones running in a loose tactical formation, crossed into the shadow corridor at 3:17 a.m. and cut their approach speed to reduce their radar signature. Slower approach, lower wake. The surface search radar, now busy tracking decoy contacts to the north, had its processing priorities pointed in the wrong direction. The first Sea Baby crossed inside the escort boat's operational radius at 3:24 a.m. Still no interdiction. At 3:26 a.m., the Corvette's close-in weapon system apparently detected one of the approaching drones, a radar return at the edge of the system's minimum engagement range. There are roughly 30 seconds here that will be debated in naval warfare analysis seminars for years. Whether the CIWS engaged, whether the operator hesitated, whether the radar mode was set correctly for surface targets at that range. The operational record is unclear. What is clear from drone footage captured by the Ukrainian strike assets themselves is that at 3:27 a.m., the first general quarters alarm sounded aboard the Corvette. 11 seconds later, the first warhead detonated. The detonation point was the port side hull, approximately 1 meter above the waterline at frame station 47. For a Steregushchiy-class vessel, that places the impact directly adjacent to the forward engine room bulkhead. Not a coincidence. Ukraine's targeting had identified the engine room as the highest value strike point, because flooding that compartment simultaneously cripples propulsion and creates conditions where damage control teams are fighting fire and flooding in the single most critical space on the ship. The crew responded with trained efficiency, the kind you develop when you've drilled the scenario hundreds of times. Watertight doors throughout the ship began closing. Damage control parties moved to the engine room. The officer of the watch ordered emergency propulsion preparations to move the vessel away from further attack vectors. But the second drone was already inside 300 meters. It struck the starboard quarter, the opposite side of the vessel, 22 seconds after the first impact. Port flooding on one side, starboard flooding on the other. The Corvette's internal damage control teams, organized to respond to a single breach, now had to split their efforts across two separate flooding sources in two separate compartments. The ship began listing, slowly at first, barely perceptible at deck level, then accelerating as flooding rates in both compartments overwhelmed the vessel's pumping capacity. A third drone, approaching from directly aft, detected the ship's course change. Its autonomous guidance system adjusted the terminal approach vector. It struck the stern, below the waterline, near the rudder assembly. 3 hits. 3 separate flooding sources. A crew of 80 sailors now fighting for their ship against machines that felt no fear, no hesitation, and no need to close within range of the Corvette's own weapons to deliver their payload. Subscribe to ConflictEast if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works. Because what this operation represents is not just a tactical success, it's a shift in how naval warfare will be conducted for the next generation. The fourth drone, the final strike asset, did not find the Corvette. By the time it reached the target area, the Corvette had moved significantly from its predicted position, and the drone's terminal guidance lost the target in the thermal confusion generated by the first 3 impacts. It ran its programmed search pattern, failed to reacquire, and eventually exhausted its range and sank. An inherent limitation of autonomous systems operating without real-time operator correction. 3 hits out of 4 strike assets. A 75% effectiveness rate against an alerted, maneuvering target with active defensive systems. By any measure of military analysis, that is an extraordinary result. The Corvette did not sink immediately. Here's where the story takes a human dimension that pure tactical analysis sometimes misses. 80 sailors were aboard that vessel. They were not admirals. They were not policy architects. They were working sailors doing a job in a war their government ordered them to fight. The flooding was severe enough that the ship's captain made the decision, approximately 14 minutes after the first impact, to issue a controlled evacuation order for the engineering spaces as the list reached critical threshold. Russian naval rescue assets, Coast Guard vessels from the Kerch side of the strait, responded. They reached the stricken Corvette approximately 40 minutes after the first impact. By that point, the vessel's list had stabilized at an angle that made it non-operational, but apparently not imminently sinking. Ukrainian General Staff reports indicated the vessel suffered catastrophic damage to its propulsion and steering systems, rendering it combat ineffective. Satellite imagery analysis conducted in the operation's aftermath showed the Corvette being towed into Kerch Harbor, not under its own power, where it was placed in a floating dry dock for emergency repairs. OSINT investigators tracking the vessel's subsequent movements found no evidence of return to operational status within the time frame of available observation data. A warship towed into harbor with 3 flooding incidents and a compromised structural frame does not return to sea quickly. The minimum realistic repair timeline for damage of this severity, assuming Russian shipyard capacity, which has been significantly degraded by Ukrainian strikes on naval infrastructure, is measured in months, not weeks. If you believe tactics win wars, type ConflictEast in the comments. Because what Ukraine demonstrated in this operation is pure tactical intelligence turned into kinetic effect. Now let's talk about why Russian command failed to prevent this, because the failure here was not primarily about technology, it was about doctrine. Russian naval doctrine for Kerch Strait defense was built around the assumption that the primary threats were aerial, cruise missiles, drone aircraft, and potentially manned aviation. The surface threat model was built around intercepting fast attack craft, things that require a crew, things with a significant radar cross-section, things that behave consistently with manned naval vessels. Sea Baby drones do not behave like manned vessels. They don't need to maintain station-keeping distance from threats. They don't have a crew that can be intimidated by warning shots or the approach of a larger vessel. They don't respond to radio hails. They don't deviate from their terminal approach vector when a close-in weapon system begins tracking them. They just keep coming. The escort boat protocol Russia employed was designed for human adversaries. Human crews will break off an attack if they calculate the odds are unfavorable. They will maneuver to avoid engagement. They will respond to the presence of defensive assets by reconsidering the attack vector. Autonomous drones running a pre-programmed terminal approach sequence will not. Russia's entire close-in defense architecture for this picket station was optimized for the wrong threat. The radar mode selected, the patrol patterns of the escort boats, the engagement protocols loaded into the close-in weapon system, all of it designed for threats that are larger, slower to react, and operated by humans who want to survive. What would NATO have done differently in this scenario? Comment your tactical analysis below. The defensive problem that Russia failed to solve here is not unique to Russia. It's a problem every navy in the world is now urgently working to address. The answer likely involves a layered barrier of autonomous surface vessels operating as an outer detection ring, capable of both identification and engagement at range. It involves radar modes specifically optimized for low wake, low-speed surface contacts in cluttered coastal environments. It involves updated rules of engagement that allow engagement of unidentified surface contacts beyond minimum safe distance without the hesitation that human authorization chains sometimes introduce. None of those systems were in place at the Kerch picket station on the night of this operation. Russia made a second critical error that the tactical record reveals clearly. They underestimated Ukraine's willingness to sustain an intelligence operation for months before executing a strike. Soviet-era military doctrine, which continues to influence Russian command thinking at the operational level, tends to prioritize speed and mass. Sustained, patient, intelligence-driven targeting of the kind Ukraine executed here does not fit comfortably within that framework. 3 months of observation, patient accumulation of data, meticulous mapping of a single vessel's patrol routines before committing strike assets. That is the patience of a military that has learned, through years of asymmetric warfare, that preparation is not weakness. Preparation is the only thing that turns limited resources into decisive outcomes. Ukraine doesn't have a surface fleet. It lost its principal naval vessels in the opening hours of the full-scale invasion or through various operational losses since. What Ukraine has instead is the capacity to think differently about naval power. Not how do we match Russia's fleet, but how do we make Russia's fleet irrelevant? Sea baby drones are the answer. The Kerch Strait operation is the clearest demonstration yet of what that answer looks like when executed at full capability. The operational aftermath extended well beyond the damaged Corvette itself. Russian naval posture in the Strait's southern approach underwent significant restructuring in the operation's wake, according to OSINT analysis of subsequent satellite imagery. The standard 4-hour patrol arc disappeared from observable patterns. Vessels operating in the area began conducting more erratic, unpredictable movements, which is tactically sensible as an anti-drone measure but comes at a cost. Unpredictable patrol patterns require more crew time on watch, more fuel consumption per nautical mile patrolled, and critically, reduce the radar coverage continuity that picket vessels exist to provide. The operation didn't just damage a single Corvette. It degraded the entire patrol concept by forcing Russian vessels to prioritize their own survivability over their surveillance mission. A warship constantly maneuvering to avoid drone attack is not maintaining steady radar coverage of its assigned sector. That surveillance gap has strategic consequences. The Kerch Strait's radar coverage architecture, designed to provide early warning of aerial threats, monitor commercial traffic, and coordinate with shore-based air defense systems, works best when picket vessels hold predictable station. Disrupt the stations, and you create gaps in the coverage picture. Intercepted communications assessed by Ukrainian intelligence and shared with allied partner services indicated significant friction within the Russian Black Sea Fleet command structure in the operation's aftermath. The incident triggered an internal review of surface threat protocols that had not been significantly updated since the Moskva cruiser was struck by Neptune missiles, an event that had already reshaped Russia's understanding of naval vulnerability in this conflict. The internal review, according to sourced reporting from Ukrainian intelligence partners, concluded that existing defensive measures were insufficient against coordinated multi-vector drone swarm attacks, but that available resources and timeline constraints prevented full implementation of recommended improvements across the entire patrol network. Russia knew its defenses were inadequate, but couldn't fix them fast enough. Ukraine knew Russia couldn't fix them fast enough and had no intention of waiting. Real tactics, real consequences. ConflictEast. There is a broader strategic dimension to this operation that deserves careful examination, because it connects to a pattern visible across multiple Ukrainian naval operations over the course of this conflict. Ukraine has not been trying to achieve sea control in the Black Sea. Sea control, the ability to operate freely across a defined maritime space while denying that same freedom to an adversary, is typically a function of having a surface fleet capable of sustained combat operations. Ukraine doesn't have that fleet. What Ukraine has been executing instead is a systematic campaign of sea denial. Not controlling the sea, but making it too costly for Russia to control it comfortably. Striking the ships that anchor Russia's naval presence. Targeting the logistical nodes that support those ships. Creating an operational environment where Russian naval commanders must constantly calculate risk against every routine movement. The practical effect of sustained sea denial across this conflict has been substantial. Russian surface vessels have been progressively withdrawn from the northwestern Black Sea, the approaches to Odessa, the Danube Delta, the Ukrainian coastline. The Ukrainian grain corridor that eventually resumed operations functioned in part because Russia's surface fleet had been made too vulnerable to operate aggressively in that space. The Kerch Strait picket operation fits within that strategic framework. It wasn't designed to sink the Corvette to the bottom, though rendering it combat ineffective for an extended period achieves much of the same strategic effect. It was designed to demonstrate that no vessel in Russia's Black Sea fleet is safe. That routine duty is not safe. That predictable patterns are death sentences. Every Russian sailor who heard about this operation understood something that no briefing can teach. The sea they're operating in belongs to Ukraine's drones, not to them. That psychological dimension of naval operations is older than modern warfare. Fleets that believe themselves vulnerable to attack at any moment fight differently, maneuver differently, make different risk calculations. The material damage from this operation was significant. The psychological impact on Russian naval operational culture was potentially more significant still. Now let's examine the tactical lessons this operation teaches, because several of them apply well beyond the specific context of Ukraine and Russia. The first lesson is about patient intelligence work as a force multiplier. Ukraine's drone operators are skilled. The Sea Baby is an effective weapon system. But neither of those capabilities would have produced this result without 3 months of observation work that made the strike possible. Intelligence preparation of the operational environment. Understanding exactly what the target does, when it does it, and where its vulnerabilities emerge, turned a capable weapon into a decisive strike. Skip the intelligence phase, and the same drones might achieve very different results. The second lesson is about multi-vector swarm tactics as a solution to point defense. A single drone approaching a defended vessel will almost certainly be intercepted. 3 or 4 drones approaching simultaneously from different vectors forces a defender to make prioritization decisions under extreme time pressure, which target to engage first, which systems to assign to which threats, how to sequence responses when the engagement timeline is measured in seconds. Ukraine's operational design exploited this decision-making overload deliberately and effectively. The third lesson is about routine and vulnerability. The Corvette's crew had been rotating through the same patrol arc for a month. They knew their ship. They trusted their procedures. That familiarity, which generates genuine operational efficiency in most circumstances, had also made them predictable in precisely the way a patient adversary could exploit. Routine breeds vulnerability. The lesson for defenders is that predictability must be constantly disrupted, even at significant cost to operational efficiency. The fourth lesson, and perhaps the most strategically significant, is about asymmetric cost imposition. A Sea Baby drone costs a fraction of a percent of the cost of the vessel it can put out of action. Ukraine has found a way to impose enormous costs on Russia's naval capacity at minimal cost to itself. The economic mathematics of this exchange rate are unsustainable for Russia over time because the Black Sea Fleet represents a finite and expensive asset pool, while Ukraine's drone production capacity has been scaled substantially with international support and domestic manufacturing expansion. Before we reach the final assessment, here's something worth sitting with. Was the decision to continue the operation after the mechanical failure of the third launch platform the right tactical call? The operators had a choice to postpone and ensure optimal conditions or press forward with a degraded configuration. They chose to press forward. It worked. But what if the backup cable rerouting had failed? What if the degraded launch geometry had given the escort boats just enough additional time to intercept? The outcome would have looked very different. War is full of decisions made under imperfect information with imperfect resources and imperfect options. The operators made a judgment call under pressure. It succeeded. But the margin was narrower than the final result suggests. That distinction matters. Tactical success should not be confused with tactical wisdom after the fact. The operators may have been right to continue. They may have been lucky. Likely some of both. Understanding the difference is what separates tactical analysis from simply celebrating outcomes. Would you have made the same call at 2:30 a.m. with a malfunctioning launch system and a 7-day intelligence window already being consumed? Drop your answer in the comments. Real tactical thinking happens in those moments, not in the clean retrospective. The broader war context around this operation matters too. By the period when this strike occurred, Ukraine's naval drone capability had already demonstrated its capacity to strike targets across the full operational depth of the Black Sea, from the Crimean coastline to Russian port facilities at Novorossiysk. The Kerch Strait operation was not a debut. It was a refinement of a capability that had been continuously developed and iterated through operational experience. Each previous operation had taught Ukraine's naval drone operators something about Russian defensive procedures, about radar geometry around different vessel types, about decoy effectiveness at different ranges, about the timing windows that open when a crew's attention is divided between multiple simultaneous threats. The Kerch Strait operation incorporated all of those lessons. The three-vector approach, the decoy sequencing, the timing of the strike package to exploit the escort boat's response to the decoys. These are not things you design in a planning room. These are things you learn from doing and failing and adapting and doing again. Ukraine's drone operators have been getting better with every operation. Russia's naval defenses have been getting more cautious, more defensive, more constrained in their operational patterns. The direction of the adaptation curve is not favorable for Russia. The operation also demonstrated the continued relevance of human intelligence networks in an era of technological warfare. The satellite imagery analysis that mapped the patrol arc was sophisticated and essential. But OSINT investigators analyzing the operation's aftermath noted indicators suggesting that elements of the target package, particularly the information about the interior layout of the vessel and the location of the engine room bulkhead, may have come from sources beyond open satellite data. Ukraine has cultivated intelligence networks that extend into occupied territories and into communities connected to Russian military personnel. Information flowing through those networks about ship movements, crew rotations, maintenance schedules, and defensive system configurations has repeatedly provided Ukrainian planners with targeting precision that satellite imagery alone could not generate. That human intelligence dimension is one of the most underreported aspects of Ukraine's asymmetric capability. Drones and missiles are visible. Human networks are not. But the strikes that succeed with unusual precision often owe something to sources that no radar track or satellite pass could provide. And that brings us to the broader picture of what Ukraine has built over the course of this conflict. Not just a drone capability or a missile capability or an artillery capability, but an integrated targeting ecosystem that connects intelligence collection across multiple domains into strike packages that arrive with a precision and coordination that consistently exceeds what Russia's planners believe is possible. Russia keeps being surprised. It keeps recalibrating its threat models. It keeps implementing defensive improvements. And Ukraine keeps finding the next gap. That pattern, innovation, adaptation, finding the next gap, is the single most important strategic story of this conflict. Not any individual weapon system, not any individual battle. The pattern of a military that has learned to think asymmetrically about a problem it cannot solve symmetrically, and has found ways to impose costs that consistently exceed what its adversary can absorb without strategic consequence. The Kerch Strait picket station is quieter now than it was before this operation. The vessels that do operate there move differently, less predictably, more cautiously. With a threat calculus that now includes, in every calculation, the possibility that a surface drone is tracking their pattern from just over the horizon. That awareness, that constant tactical vigilance, costs something. It costs crew rest. It costs fuel. It costs mission effectiveness as vessels prioritize survivability over surveillance. Multiplied across the entire Black Sea Fleet operational posture, that cost accumulates into something that matters at the strategic level. A navy that is afraid of its operating environment cannot project the kind of power it was built to project. Russia's Black Sea Fleet, once the force that launched cruise missiles at Ukrainian cities and blockaded Ukrainian grain exports for months, has been progressively reduced to operating from positions of increasing caution and constraint. Sea Baby drones did that. Patient Ukrainian intelligence work did that. Operations like the Kerch Strait strike did that. One ship at a time, one compromised patrol sector at a time, one updated Russian threat assessment at a time. Ukraine doesn't just use weapons. Ukraine invents new ways to fight. Real battles, real tactics, real consequences. ConflictEast. Now to the answer from the tactical quiz posed earlier in this video. How many Russian naval assets did Ukraine affect through Sea Baby and related naval drone operations during this phase of the conflict? The answer is B. 38 documented incidents involving Russian naval vessels, port infrastructure, or associated maritime assets, according to open-source tracking of confirmed operational reports. This includes direct strikes on vessels, damage to port facilities at Sevastopol and Novorossiysk, and successful attacks on fuel infrastructure supporting Black Sea Fleet operations. The 23 figure significantly undercounts the confirmed operational record, while the 50 figure exceeds what can be confirmed through available OSINT documentation, though the true figure, including classified operational outcomes, may be higher. The tactical lessons of this operation will be studied in naval warfare curricula for decades. Asymmetric sea denial using autonomous surface drones is no longer a theoretical concept. It has a combat record. It has documented effectiveness against defended surface combatants. And it has demonstrated that naval warfare's traditional paradigm, larger fleet wins, is fundamentally complicated by the introduction of low-cost autonomous strike systems operated by an innovative and patient adversary. 3 questions worth holding as you leave this analysis. Was the Ukrainian decision to launch with a degraded configuration after the mechanical failure of the third launch platform the correct tactical call? The outcome validated it, but operations are not judged by their outcomes alone. Was the risk acceptance appropriate given the intelligence window and the operational security requirements? Could Russia have prevented this operation through different defensive architecture? The answer is almost certainly yes in principle. A properly layered outer barrier of autonomous counter-drone surface vessels would have changed the threat geometry significantly. Why wasn't that architecture in place? Budget constraints? Doctrine gaps? Bureaucratic inertia? Understanding which of those factors dominated matters for predicting how quickly Russia can adapt. And what would you have done differently as the Ukrainian commander designing this operation, or as the Russian fleet commander responsible for defending the strait? The tactical decisions made on both sides were not inevitable. They were choices. What different choices were available, and what outcomes might they have produced? The Kerch Strait is quieter now. The patrol sector that Corvette used to cover is covered differently, less continuously, less confidently. The wreckage of the operational concept that put an unmodified patrol ship on a predictable arc with insufficient counter-drone defenses serves as a floating reminder of what happens when doctrine falls behind capability. Modern warfare does not wait for bureaucracies to update their threat models. It finds the gap between the threat model and reality, and it operates there until the gap closes or the damage becomes irreversible. Subscribe to ConflictEast, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. The strait is quieter now, but the lessons remain. And somewhere in the northwestern Black Sea, Ukraine's drone operators are already watching the next patrol arc, measuring the next routine, mapping the next gap. Silent, patient, ready.